Well, hello, everybody. Apologize for the delay in getting started, but you're tuning into Viral Faith here, where over the course of this pandemic, it's been my intent to spread faith and not fear. And so it's just a little quick hit during the middle of our days to check in with one another and have a conversation that will hopefully encourage your faith and strengthen you over the course of the rest of your day today. Here we do that on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We'll be making some changes as we come into July, but hello, Amy. Good to see you. If you're on, I just welcome you here, and glad that you were able to join us. I want to come back today and offer some thoughts in partnership with my friend and colleague Tim Johnson. Tim was with us a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week or so ago, and was offering a lot of insight that I wanted to come back and explore it with him a little bit more. So welcome, Tim. Glad you could join us again. You're going to be a regular on this, I think.
That's a pretty scary thought. Good to be with you.
Yeah, so Tim is a lifelong missionary guy. As a part of, I mean that as a full-on missionary. You lived and ministered in Japan for many years, and you're also a part of the missionary church leadership for our region. Tim, just remind us what is your role, your kind of ministry context right now? Can you kind of just thumbnail that, and what do you love doing these days?
So my role is Director of Pastoral Care for the central region of the Missionary Church, which covers Fort Wayne and South, and then Illinois and Wisconsin. So that means I get to coach pastors, I get to create networks. I'm also in charge, at least right now, of the licensing process for pastors. And I love all of it, but probably the part of my job that I love the most is connecting people so that they're encouraging and empowering, like the networks of different kinds of pastors. That's probably my favorite thing.
Yeah, Tim, you're very much a people guy, people-centered person, and one thing I always admire and like about Tim is just the high care quotient. It just flows out of you, that kind of shepherding care. So I'm going to engage Tim with a few more questions. If you remember the last time, and by the way, I want to say hi to Jacqueline and Greta, Emily, Sarah, Catherine, Marcille. Hi, Katie Henshin. Glad that you guys could join us here today. And so, Tim, last time we talked, you mentioned several things that have been encouraging and deepening faith in you. As you just mentioned, you have a role within our larger church family of our denomination, and so that is a high stakes responsibility you have there, caring for people and ministering a number of different things. But within that context, in the context of your own life, you were just kind of sharing some headlines and lessons learned that may be transferable for us as we move into a different phase of the pandemic, and with all the other tension that we're facing, disruption and upheaval. So what's on your kind of your top of your list in terms of things that are stretching you in your faith, or that you know have been stretching others in their faith?
Well, I would say, and I kind of referenced it last week, I think, but perhaps I didn't. It's just something, you have all these things going on in your head and you can't remember what you say. But I think during this time, we've all experienced our humanity at a new level. I mean, we all know that we're human, that no one needs to tell us that. But we experience parts of our humanity that we're not as excited about admitting or even revealing to others. And when all the props are knocked out from underneath us, we'd like to think that our the way that we depend on God is what we've always thought it would be in times like this. And you don't always know exactly what that's going to look like until you're in the midst of a time like this. And I think probably one of the most helpful things to me is to actually accept the fact that I'm a human being going through this time, but I'm a human being who has a Jesus to follow in the midst of it. And I'm not just a human being trying to sort through my feelings, but I get to sort through my feelings and process them with the Lord, you know, and to allow him to really speak into what they mean for me. That's been really encouraging for me. It's not been easy. In fact, this whole thing continues to be hard. And I do think oftentimes when we're in leadership positions or people kind of look up to us, whether it's positionally or there's a relational authority piece, or like, well, this is the guy, let's go to him because he knows how to handle stress. Well, I worry about the pressure of the weight of that responsibility to have it all together during this time. I feel like one of the greatest gifts I can give you or anyone is to say, you're going to feel very human, and you're going to feel like all the answers you've given everyone else sometimes don't work for you like you thought they would. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let's press into that a little bit more. Like, how did this notion of allowing yourself to be human in the ways that you're talking about, I mean, it's particularly relevant for us as leaders, but it's also relevant to us as parents or spouses or friends. Sure. How did that kind of surface for you? Where were you feeling your humanness in trying to make things work?
I would say the two words that I would have told you, especially before this time, were not mutually exclusive, but I don't usually experience them in the same space. And forgive me if I've said these last week already, are the two words grief and gratitude. Usually when we experience grief, it's because we've had a profound loss, and that loss is often a loss of the death of something, whether it's a relationship or a person actually has passed away. It's a death of a routine, the loss of a job or whatever. And so we're familiar with what grief feels like. And then in the midst of the grief of specifically of this season that we've experienced, we all know what lamenting is, and we've all been invited to write out our laments and process, which I think is so good. But I think I've seen the value of being in that space and also being in the space of gratitude, meaning like, Lord, thank you that I actually don't have this figured out. I'm really feeling the weight of this loss. Thank you that you are sufficient and you are good. Thank you that I don't have it figured out. Thank you that I'm still trying to figure it out. And so experiencing both grief and gratitude really in the same space is kind of a new thing for me.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I'm tracking. I don't know if those who are joining us, what exactly you might be hearing in this, but one of the things that feels to me like the Lord is saying through you is this idea of allowing the hard to draw you closer to Jesus. And part of that is giving yourself permission. Almost what comes to mind is loving yourself as Jesus loves you. He doesn't have this expectation that you'll hit it right every time. Like there's grace to be who you are in this and still find him in it. And I don't know, that kind of speaks to me, because I often miss that. I feel like there's just responsibility to rise to in any given thing, and there's no time to be human in it, right? Like, because people are counting on you. Is that kind of close to the heart of what you're saying?
In fact, you've helped me develop this more just by what you said. And there's grief, there's gratitude, and somehow we're not always able to figure out how to meld the two. But I think you said it well. Really, grace invites us to lean into grief. Grace invites us to lean into gratitude. So really, grace is the ultimate bridge builder at times, anytime, but especially at times like this when we're trying to figure out what that feels like. Because honestly, I think lately not only the pandemic, but other issues that are rising up in the cultural narrative right now. People say lament, lament. I'm lamenting the fact that I have to lament so much right now. And so I'm actually tired. So when people say, write out your process your laments, and I'm tired of lamenting. I just want it to change, and I want something new. And I'm thinking that's probably a familiar feeling for people throughout history. Like even, the children of Israel, when they in captivity for all those years in Babylon, they had no idea of how long it was going to be. They just knew that they were told to plant gardens and, try to make the best of their life in that place. But they were thinking, well, I'm only going to be here for a little while. And then they're looking at their, metaphorical watches, like, let's get this show on the road. And yet they didn't know. So they were tired of waiting. They were tired of lamenting, even though they were commanded to plant gardens and, give in marriage and all that kind of stuff that they were, encouraged to do in the book of Jeremiah. I'm thinking they're going, I'm tired of being in this place. And so I think for me, what you just said is just such a beautiful expression that really it's not just grace, right? It's God's grace. It's the grace of God. I think a lot of people like the idea of grace, but grace finds its source in the ultimate, the heart and the character of God. And so that's what helps me lean into the grief part of my humanity with the invitation to the gratitude part of my humanity, because I do have the ability to feel the weight and the gravity of that grief. And I also have been given a will that's been strengthened, even though I feel my ability to choose is compromised during times like this.
Yeah.
God's grace empowers my will to actually be grateful. So,
well, let's see how others are hearing this. And by the way, Donna, welcome to the conversation. I'm just wondering, for all of us tracking with this, how is it going for you to balance grief and gratitude right now? These two key words that Tim has talked about, that being human means we grieve, and in our grief, I mean, it's hard to imagine. Grief makes you tired, right? I mean, when you see somebody grieving, there's just total output with that. And so I like that connection, that when we're experiencing grief as we are, or loss in this particular season, whether it's tied to how we're feeling about race or ongoing pandemic stuff, or all the corollaries of that. Maybe jobs have been impacted, relationships have been impacted. So you're living in this kind of grief, and yet we know that there is hope in it. And the gateway to hope and joy is expressing gratitude, and allowing yourself to be human in between. I just wonder, for those listening and watching and sharing in this conversation, do you tend more these days towards grief or more towards gratitude? And I wonder if the Lord is teaching you anything in that. Feel free to just comment on that, or like somebody else's comment if anything is connecting here today. But it's a particularly relevant thing just in my life. Had a conversation with friends last night via Zoom, and was challenged myself at this very point. Just feeling such weight around some very weighty matters in my life, but feeling like I can't be. It's not okay to admit my humanness. Say a little bit more about where that notion comes from for you, and what gave rise to that awareness of, I have to do this like a human. I got to step out of superhuman mode to just pull up my own bootstraps. There's a moment to just exist in that, and then find Jesus.
Well, I think I've learned that, I've certainly learned that lesson in past crises, whether, like I might have mentioned to you, in the past, I was gone through, 8 9 years ago, the tsunami and all the stuff that went around that,
Mm.
and living at
You're
a time.
speaking of the tsunami in Japan
Tsunami, yeah, we were
that
missionaries.
devastated Japan. You were there during that time.
Yeah, we were there during that time, and the ground kept shaking. And I've often said, Psalm 46 has always been a favorite verse. It's probably one of the first passages I learned as like a 12 or 13-year-old. And yet it just took on such meaning, though the mountains fall into the mighty sea, we will not fear. And then, of course, in verse 10, be still and know that I'm God. When you speak those words in your context now, we all know those words were written in a context, and yet we can apply those into our context now. So in the time of the tsunami,
Right.
I was telling my co-workers that this whole thing back in March started to trigger some of the feelings I had with them, like the helplessness, the fear, the anxiety that potentially can turn inward and become depression, just naming all those things. And so I think at the very beginning, I remembered that I was triggered pretty immediately. And so I didn't even wait to help. I didn't even wait to give myself permission to be human. I'm going, here we go. I recognize these feelings. I better talk about these sooner than later, because I'm going to move inward. And for me, anxiety is a bigger issue than depression, but anxiety, again, turned inward becomes that. And so I think for me, it wasn't a hard thing to say, I've just got to be able to name this right away, because it's not going to help me to try to hide it or be strong. And in a way, when you're doing what we do in our office, you're working with churches, you're working with leaders, we think, well, I got to make sure the best thing I can do for churches or people in churches or pastors or whatever is to tell them it's going to be okay. And I still believe that. But in the midst of that, like, just so you know, I'm struggling with this now. I'm not struggling the way you are, because you have a certain role in your church. My struggling has actually nothing to do with my role, but I don't want to bifurcate my life to the extent that I have my role and then I have my human struggle. I want it to inform each other. I want it to be a part of being a person of integrity. Means being a whole person. And when you're a whole person, you actually introduce that, and you allow yourself to allow that humanity not only to help you cope, but actually help inform how you do ministry in the kingdom during a season like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're talking, I just have a host of images of Jesus from the gospel pictures of Jesus entering into our humanity, of course, first with the incarnation itself, coming close. But as he walked the earth, he was always coming close and, as you say, inviting people's humanity, allowing for them to come close, or coming very close to him, like going out of his way to engage the Samaritan woman at the well. There's kind of a welcome for you to be who you are in a moment, an embrace of that, even while he calls us to more if we follow him. But we can only embrace it as we are in the moment, and we don't have to put on airs or appear to be something different than we are. There's kind of a grace to be your own human self in that moment, and just find Jesus in the humanness. That's a powerful word for us today, Tim, to experience Jesus in our actual life, and be at some level of authenticity and peace with ourselves in that. We've been talking around fellowship about trying to get our hands around the four big relationships of our lives. There's four big relational directions, according to what Jesus says: loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. There's actually four directions in there: up, down, in, and out. And this idea of loving ourselves as Jesus loves us, giving ourselves permission to be human in the ways that we are human, not giving permission to sin, but just allowing ourselves to be loved.
Yes.
There's something in that downward direction, and what you've been describing reminds me of that. So thank you all for watching with us and kind of discussing this. Maybe this will turn into some discussions around a dinner table tonight, or a conversation with a friend, or a connection along the way. It's our hope that just these kind of free-ranging conversations with one another might inspire a fresh thought, or something that you'll dwell on later. I want to thank you, Tim, for taking time out of your afternoon to come back and kind of hit us with part 2 of that conversation that was started the other week. And to those watching, please know too, if there's something on your mind in particular that you're wondering about, and you want to wonder out loud with one another and with me, shoot me a message, or let me know, or just leave a comment here on something that you're curious for us to talk about as it relates to faith and what's going on currently in our world, whether it's the pandemic or tension socially, racially. I'm willing to go wherever it is that you're wondering about. So, Tim, maybe just a final word from you. Anything that captures your mind, or is intriguing to you, that you just want to share before I pray?
Well, and anyone who's spent any amount of time with me recently has heard me say this. There's kind of a threefold posture that I've been having. I'm wanting to have in life long before, probably in the last year, I've been thinking about this. And again, please forgive me if I said this last week, but I want to, during this time especially, because I want it to be true vertically, but I want it to have a horizontal impact. I want to be curious about who God is and who he wants me to be in this situation, how he wants me to receive his love. I want to be humble. I want to be humbly receiving. I'm not going to try to have it all together. That's going to inform the way I allow him to love me. That's also going to inform the way I love other people. It's going to inform that whole forbearance thing. Remember, really, when you're humble, you're willing to be forbearant. And then generosity with, time, talent, treasure, and touch, just give of myself to other people in the midst of my own humanity and my own struggle. I still get to be a curious person, curious, humble, and generous. And so just to kind of have that threefold posture just ever before me has really been so helpful.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, let me just pray that over us throughout the rest of our day here and tomorrow. So, Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to come together and just focus our eyes on our faith in you and how you're building it. And so I pray this blessing that Tim is attempting to line himself up to and live under, to be curious, to be humble, and to be generous. Those are fruits of the Spirit for sure. And they are markers of you in our life. And so I pray blessing over Tim as he leans into that and tries to live more and more out of that posture. I pray the same for us. Lord, help us to have the grace for ourselves that you have for ourselves in our grief, in our through our gratitude. Help us to find you just where we're at. You're so accessible. And so I pray this blessing over us here today. May we be curious, humble, and increasingly generous people. I pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you all for joining us for this little short conversation during our day. I hope that it adds value to your life and blesses you in one way or another. Tim, thanks again so much for your time, for being with us, and we look forward to talking again real soon. So that's all for now. God bless everybody.